There are relationships that once felt like a place of comfort, a safe haven you could turn to. But over time, something changes. You don't know exactly when or how, but now, every encounter leaves you drained, tense, even suffocated. The most painful part? Sometimes, it's not a stranger who makes you feel that way. It's a loved one. The people who make you feel guilty, useless, or like you're no longer allowed to be yourself are often the ones you thought you could always count on. Have you ever asked yourself, why do I keep staying quiet, holding it in, and trying to maintain a relationship that hurts me? Just because it's family, or because we've known each other for so long? Many of us, especially as we grow older, are taught to believe that enduring pain is part of love, that avoiding confrontation is a sign of respect, and that walking away means we're ungrateful. But the truth is this: no one should have to sacrifice their emotional well-being just to preserve a relationship that causes them pain day after day. In this video, I'll share 9 clear signs that show you not only have the right, but perhaps the need, to set boundaries or even walk away, whether the person is family or a lifelong friend. And that isn't selfish. That is how you love yourself. At the right time. 1. They always make you feel guilty, even though you did nothing wrong. Have you ever found yourself sitting alone in a quiet afternoon, heart heavy not from anger, but from sadness, right after a phone call with your children? Sad, not because you said anything wrong, not because you raised your voice or refused a request. You simply stayed quiet. You said, "I'll try my best," like always. You took on the responsibility again. And when you put the phone down, what lingered wasn't connection. It was a feeling of guilt, as if you hadn't done enough, hadn't sacrificed enough, hadn't been good enough to deserve the love of your own family. That guilt becomes so familiar, you stop noticing it. You've grown used to hearing things like, "You don't understand me," "You don't love the grandkids the way their other grandma does," or "You didn't really help, so don't act like you did." Words that seem light as air, but pierce like tiny needles when repeated over and over. Eventually, it becomes hard to tell the difference between love and veiled blame. I once sat with a 68-year-old woman, her eyes red after her child told her, "You don't help us with anything." She said, "It's not that I don't want to help. I just don't have the strength anymore. But when I say that, they call me selfish." And in the end, I'm the one who says sorry, even though I didn't do anything wrong. Her story is not rare. So many older adults live with the constant feeling that they haven't done enough, even after a lifetime of sacrifice, of putting others first, of burying their own dreams just to support someone else's. In psychology, there's a term for this: emotional guilt tripping. It's when someone makes you feel wrong just to maintain control. And the danger is, when this happens within family, the guilt is disguised as love. That makes it hard to question, hard to say no. And if you're told you're wrong long enough, you begin to believe it. But you need to know this: real love shouldn't come with guilt. Sacrifice shouldn't be a burden you carry forever. And "I'm sorry" should not be something you say just to keep the peace. If you find yourself always apologizing, always explaining, always being the one to reach out, even when you haven't done anything wrong, then maybe it's time to stop and ask yourself, is this love, or is it a weight? Setting boundaries doesn't mean cutting ties. Sometimes, it's the only way to preserve your peace. No one deserves to be haunted by guilt for a lifetime, especially not you. You, who have given so much to others, maybe now it's time to give something back to yourself. 2. They appear when needed, then disappear when you need them. There's a quiet kind of sadness that many older adults carry in their hearts. The feeling of being forgotten. On holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, or simply when the weather turns cold, you find yourself hoping for a message, a phone call. Not for gifts or anything grand, just a simple, "Hey mom, how are you doing?" would be enough to warm your heart. But the phone stays silent. The house stays still. And you keep telling yourself, they must be busy. Then when a call does come, it's often to ask for money, for help babysitting, or to unload some problem they want you to fix. In those moments, the voice on the other end sounds so warm, so familiar, and then just as quickly, it's gone again, as if you're just a placeholder in their lives. And strangely enough, even though you see it happening, you still say yes. You help. Because you tell yourself, we're family. How could I say no? But the hurt stays. When you're sick, no one knows. When you're in the hospital, it's the nurse who checks in, not your kids. When your legs ache and you want someone to take you to the doctor, no one has time. Each of these moments is like a tiny needle, quietly piercing your heart, slow but painful. One day you begin to realize, maybe I only exist in their lives when they need something from me. I remember an elderly woman once told me that when she was moving to a new apartment, she called her children and grandchildren to ask for help packing. They were all too busy, so she quietly hired someone to lift the boxes, wrapped every dish and pot by herself. The following week, one of her grandchildren called, all cheerful, asking, "Grandma, do you have a little extra money? I'm short on tuition." She helped. She transferred the money, and then the phone went silent again for months. She said she didn't blame anyone, but the look in her eyes told a different story. Distant, as if swallowing a question she didn't dare say out loud. Am I being used? And just afraid to admit it? That's what a one-sided relationship looks like, where you keep giving, but nothing ever comes back. And when love isn't mutual, it's no longer family. It becomes a timed transaction. People show up, take what they need, and disappear. And you're left behind, with an emptiness that grows. Not because you lost something, but because you no longer feel like you matter. Growing older should not be a journey of hidden loneliness. You deserve love not only when you give, but also when you need to be held. If someone only thinks of you when they want something, but disappears when you need them, maybe it's time to step back. Not out of anger, but to protect your heart from the disappointment that keeps repeating itself. Because relationships only hold value when they nourish you, not when they leave you feeling invisible, isolated, and alone in the middle of your own family. 3. They disregard your feelings. There are moments when you just want to share a small sadness, something that's been weighing on your heart, or maybe you simply need someone to listen. But as soon as you begin to speak, the other person brushes it off with a familiar line. You're old, you overthink too much, or, it's not a big deal, why get so worked up? They smile gently, as if nothing you said was worth paying attention to, and so you go quiet. Not because the sadness is gone, but because you no longer feel like explaining your own feelings. Older adults, even after a lifetime of experiences, never grow old in how they feel. A careless word from a child or grandchild, a cold look at the dinner table, or simply the absence of a check-in when you're not feeling well, all of these can hurt deeply. But what hurts the most isn't the moment itself. It's the sense that your feelings don't matter, that what you feel is dismissed as nonsense or overly sensitive because of age. Slowly, you begin to question whether you even have the right to feel sad, to cry, or to be hurt. You start to doubt yourself. I once listened to an elderly woman share her story. Every time she tried to gently comment on how her daughter disciplined the grandchildren with shouting, her daughter would say, "Mom, don't interfere. You're old now, you don't understand." A light remark, but enough to silence her for a week, not out of anger, but out of sorrow. She felt like a shadow in her own home, living with family, yet her voice didn't seem to matter, so she stopped offering advice. When she heard her grandchild cry, she turned away, her heart aching but resigned. Because if I speak, they'll just say I'm being dramatic or overthinking again. Those seemingly harmless words are, in fact, a subtle yet cruel form of emotional dismissal. In psychology, it's called emotional invalidation, making someone believe that their feelings are wrong or don't count. When it happens often enough, people retreat into themselves, afraid to speak up, and worse, they begin to distrust their own emotions. That's when loneliness creeps in. During meals, in swallowed conversations, in sighs that go unheard. But you must remember, emotions are never right or wrong. If you feel sad, it's real. If something hurts, it deserves to be acknowledged, not dismissed. Age doesn't take away your right to feel. If anything, it means you deserve even more understanding, because your heart has carried so much. You're not being unreasonable. You're simply touching parts of life others have forgotten how to see. And if someone makes you feel wrong for feeling sad, makes you believe your hurt is insignificant, perhaps they're not someone who deserves to stand so close. Setting boundaries with those who don't respect your emotions isn't selfish. It's how you tell yourself, I deserve to be heard. 4. They compare you, making you feel inferior. There are relationships where every meeting leaves you not with warmth, but with a quiet wound. Not because of arguments or harsh words, but because of seemingly harmless comparisons. So-and-so's mom still travels all the time. Or, my friend's grandma cooks every day and even grows organic vegetables for the grandkids. Or, that other grandma still takes care of her grandkids and handles a dozen other things. On the surface, these comments may sound light, but over time, they become tiny needles pricking at your sense of worth, making you feel like you're never doing enough, that your presence is somehow lacking. If it happened once, maybe you could brush it off, but when it's repeated again and again, you begin to believe it. You start doing more, trying harder, giving in more, sacrificing more, not because it brings you joy, but because you fear that if you don't, you'll keep being compared, keep being criticized. The feeling that you're always less than someone else, especially in the eyes of your own family, becomes a quiet and persistent kind of pain. I once met a soft-spoken man in his 70s who lived alone after his wife passed. Every time his daughter visited, instead of asking how he was, the first thing she said was, "Can't you keep the house tidy? You're nothing like my father-in-law. He's so neat." At first, he laughed it off, but over time, he grew quieter, smiled less, withdrew. "She's my daughter. I can't be mad at her," he said. "But when she keeps saying things like that, I start to feel like I'm just a burden." His eyes drifted far away, as if each word had slowly chipped away at his self-worth. Comparison may seem like motivation, but often it's a subtle way of denying someone's value, especially when the person listening is elderly. Someone who's spent a lifetime working hard, giving, sacrificing, and now just wants to be seen with sincerity. You don't need reminders of what you lack. What you need is acknowledgement for what you've done, even the smallest things. No one deserves to be used as a measuring stick just so others can feel superior. And if every time you see someone, they make you feel smaller, lesser, not enough, that's not closeness, that's emotional erosion. You have every right to step back from relationships that make you forget your own worth. Because growing older isn't about proving you can still measure up to someone else. It's about finally living fully as who you are, whole, kind, and worthy of respect, just as you are. 5. You feel stressed and anxious every time you communicate with them. There are people so familiar to you that you can predict exactly how they'll respond when you share something. You know their tone, their timing, even their silences, but instead of feeling safe, you feel anxious. Before you even pick up the phone to call them, your heart beats faster, your chest tightens, as if you're about to enter some sort of emotional exam. You mentally rehearse what you should say, what to avoid, and prepare yourself not to feel hurt if they sound distant, irritated, or dismissive. A short call, but you walk away from it feeling like you just played a role, the role of someone fine, someone who doesn't ask for much, who agrees with everything, just to keep the conversation from turning into something painful. That kind of tension doesn't come from strangers. It comes from someone close, maybe a child, a sibling, a longtime friend, someone you once trusted deeply, someone who used to be a source of comfort. But somewhere along the way, their presence started making you feel small. They might not yell, might not say cruel things, but every interaction feels like a performance. You choose every word carefully, measure your tone, avoid anything too personal, because you know that one small misstep could turn the conversation into a debate, or worse, a wound. I once listened to a woman in her late 60s share how every time she called her son, she had to take a deep breath first. "He's always busy, always irritable, always cutting me off," she said. "I don't even finish my sentence and he goes, 'Mom, you're rambling. Is there something important?' Sometimes I just want to tell him about my little garden or the new recipe I tried, but I stop myself. He listens like he's bored, like I don't matter." She gave a small smile, but her eyes were red. These calls, meant to connect, had become moments where she felt like a burden, like she talked too much, like she was asking for too much just by wanting to be heard. Gradually, you start avoiding conversations, not because you're angry, but because you're afraid of how you'll feel afterward. Disappointed, anxious, like you're too much, too emotional, too needy. You choose silence, hoping for peace. But that isn't real peace. It's withdrawal, born from fear. The person who makes you feel anxious or uneasy every time you talk should not be the person closest to you. Real connection should feel like a space where you can exhale, speak your truth, and not fear judgment. If any relationship starts to feel like walking a tightrope, it might be time to ask yourself, do I really need to try this hard to maintain something that's supposed to bring warmth? And if your answer is no, then you have every right to step back, to protect your heart from those conversations that now feel like performances instead of real connection. 6. They make you sacrifice as a duty. There comes a point in life when you expect things to slow down. The kids are grown, the workdays are over, and you tell yourself, now it's finally my time. But for many older adults, especially those with big hearts, that time never really arrives. Instead of resting, they find themselves pulled into a never-ending cycle of giving, not because they want to, but because it's expected of them. Evelyn, 72, lives in a quiet suburb outside Houston. She spent her entire adult life raising 3 children while working full-time as a nurse. She never complained. She always said her kids were her joy. But now, decades later, when most of her friends are spending their mornings in book clubs or gardening, Evelyn is still waking up at 6 a.m. to get her grandson ready for school. Her son and daughter-in-law both work long hours and asked her to help just for a few months. That was 2 years ago. At first, Evelyn didn't mind. She adored her grandson and was happy to help. But slowly, the weight grew heavier. She started skipping her doctor appointments. She stopped going to church. Her knees began hurting more, and her days blurred into one long to-do list. When she gently mentioned taking a break or going home for a while, her son looked confused and said, "But Mom, we really count on you. We don't know what we'd do without you." That one sentence made Evelyn feel guilty for even thinking about her own needs, and so she stayed. Her younger sister also calls from time to time, not to check in, but to ask for help with bills or to vent about her grown children. Evelyn listens patiently, offers what she can, and hangs up feeling drained. It's not that she doesn't love her family, she does. But somewhere along the way, her love became a resource that everyone expected, and no one really saw. The truth is, sacrifice is beautiful when it's freely given. But when it becomes a duty, when it's assumed rather than appreciated, it slowly chips away at your spirit. People stop asking if you're okay. They stop seeing you as someone with needs and dreams of your own, and that's when giving becomes too heavy. You were not born to run on empty for people who don't know when to stop asking. Your time, your energy, your peace, they're not unlimited. You have the right to say no without guilt. You have the right to rest, to recharge, and to live these later years on your own terms. You've spent a lifetime showing up for others. Now it's your turn to show up for yourself. Not because you're selfish, but because you finally realize you matter too. 7. They underestimate your contributions. There's a kind of silence that speaks volumes, like when you send money to a family member, and instead of a thank you, all you get is nothing. Not a word. Not even a thumbs-up emoji. But heaven forbid you say no one time. Suddenly, you're the selfish one. "Mom, you've got more than enough. Can't believe you're holding back now," they say. Somehow, giving becomes expected. And if you don't, you're the problem. As we get older, what hurts most isn't the money or the energy we give. It's the feeling of being taken for granted. You start to wonder if your kindness is being seen as a duty rather than a gift. Like your worth is measured by how much you give, not who you are. You're not a person anymore, just a lifeline, a backup plan, a wallet with a heartbeat. Take Mr. Ray, 74, retired postman in Ohio. For years, he's been sending small checks to his adult kids whenever they're in a bind. Car trouble, rent, school fees. He's happy to help, but last winter, he slipped on ice and ended up in the hospital. His savings took a hit, and when his son texted asking for money that month, Ray explained, "I'm a bit tight right now, had some unexpected medical bills." The reply? A single word. "Wow." No follow-up. No, "Are you okay?" Just, "Wow." That one word hit harder than the fall, Ray said quietly. It made me feel like the only thing that mattered was whether I could still send money. Psychologists call this kind of dynamic emotional imbalance. When one person gives and gives, and gives, while the other only notices when they stop. Over time, it chips away at your self-worth. You stop sharing, you stop speaking up, you start to believe that your value depends on how useful you are. And in older age, that kind of loneliness cuts deep, because it doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being invisible to the people you love most. But here's what you need to remember. Your feelings are valid. You are not too sensitive. You are not selfish for feeling hurt. Being kind doesn't mean letting yourself be drained. Generosity should be received with gratitude, not silence when it's given, and guilt trips when it's not. If you've been giving from your heart and never once felt seen, it's okay to pause, not out of anger, not to teach anyone a lesson, but to protect your peace. Step back gently. Save some kindness for yourself, because love, when it's real, is never one-sided. It doesn't demand. It doesn't disappear when you set a boundary. You've spent your life showing up for others. Now it's time to show up for you. And no, you don't need to feel guilty for that. Not even a little. 8. When you are with them, you are no longer yourself. There are some gatherings that leave you feeling like you just stepped off a movie set. There's no camera, no director, yet you still find yourself slipping into character, playing the role of the cheerful one, the easygoing one, the one who doesn't mind. And all of this happens with family. You smile when you don't want to, nod when you really want to shake your head, and stay quiet when you deserve to speak. Only when you finally return home, let out a sigh, and sit down, do you realize you've just spent the afternoon pretending to be someone you're not. Many older adults have mastered the art of enduring, but behind that so-called strength often lies a quiet sadness, a fear of being labeled difficult, too sensitive, or just overthinking because you're old. So they hold it in, they shrink themselves, they try to be pleasant, undemanding, and agreeable, but the cost is high. Every visit, every conversation becomes draining, not because of age or physical effort, but because their inner world is quietly worn down, piece by piece. Mrs. Tuyet, 70, once told me that whenever her children and grandchildren come to visit, she feels like she's performing an emotional marathon. She's not allowed to be sad, not allowed to talk about anything that might feel negative. "Mom, don't bring up the past," her son warns. "Grandma, don't talk about your health so much, it's depressing," her grandchild jokes. So she puts everything away. She smiles when the meal tastes bland. She compliments the new outfit, even if she doesn't like it. She nods in agreement, even when her heart disagrees. And after they leave, her whole body aches. Not because she's frail, but because she's exhausted from not being herself. In psychology, this is known as emotional masking, putting on a facade in order to feel accepted. People do it because they're afraid of being rejected, of upsetting others, of being judged. But wearing a mask for too long becomes suffocating. You start to forget what you really like, what you really think, and what you truly need. And the dangerous part is, you begin to believe that this is how you have to be loved. But here's the truth. Kindness isn't measured by how much you suppress. It's about how true you're allowed to be. The people who genuinely care for you will accept you not just when you're smiling, but when you're not okay. They'll be there for the moments when you need to be heard, not just the moments when you're quietly listening. And if you find yourself constantly bracing or pretending around someone, maybe it's time to gently take a step back. Not to cut ties, but to breathe, on your own terms. To say something honest without fearing it will hurt someone. To be yourself, even if that means being an older person who sometimes feels lonely, who sometimes needs a hand to hold, or who just wants to eat a quiet meal without having to fake a smile. Living authentically doesn't mean performing every day, and you, no matter your age, deserve to live as your truest self. 9. You have forgiven them many times, but they still do not change. You know that moment when someone apologizes with a sigh and says, "I promise, it won't happen again," and you nod. Because you want to believe them? Then next week rolls around, and, well, here we go again. It's like déjà vu with a side of disappointment. You keep giving chances, thinking maybe this time they'll get it, maybe they'll finally change, but they don't, and each time, it chips away at you a little more. Older adults are some of the most forgiving people on earth. You've lived long enough to know that everyone messes up, life is messy, and holding grudges only weighs you down. So, you forgive. Again and again. Not because you forget, but because you hope. You hope they'll learn, you hope they'll care. But sometimes people mistake your kindness for a free pass. They don't see your forgiveness as a gift. They see it as a guarantee. Take Nancy, 75, a retired librarian in Pennsylvania. Her daughter, now in her 40s, has had a pattern of asking for help, making promises, and then disappearing until the next crisis. Nancy has paid overdue bills, watched the grandkids at the drop of a hat, and even dipped into her emergency savings more than once. Each time her daughter says, "I know I've messed up, Mom. I'll do better." But the cycle always repeats. The apologies get smoother. The disappointments get deeper. "I started to feel like I was enabling her more than I was helping," Nancy shared. "But worse than that, I felt like I was losing myself in the process." Psychologists call this pattern a forgiveness loop. It happens when someone relies on your forgiveness to keep doing the same thing without real change. Over time, this dynamic wears down trust and makes the forgiver feel powerless, unseen, and even disrespected. And for older adults, who value peace more than conflict, it's tempting to keep forgiving just to avoid drama, but that doesn't mean it hurts any less. Let's be clear, your feelings are valid, your pain is real. You're not overreacting, and you're not too sensitive. You've earned the right to be treated with honesty and respect, not just when it's convenient for someone else. Forgiveness should be a bridge, not a revolving door. And if you've reached a point where you can't keep forgiving without losing your peace, it's okay to say, enough. Not with anger, not with a dramatic exit, just with clarity. Setting boundaries doesn't make you mean, it makes you wise. Because forgiveness isn't supposed to be a permission slip for repeated hurt. It's a way for you to let go and breathe again. You've spent a lifetime giving people chances. Now it's time to give yourself one. A chance to protect your heart, your energy, your peace. And no, you don't have to feel guilty about it. Not even for a second. If something in this video touched a part of you, even just a little, please click like so I know you're here, listening, and feeling alongside me. Share this video with someone you care about, because they might be quietly carrying the same weight and no one knows. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel so we can keep walking this path together. Not just to talk about pain, but to learn how to heal, to live with more ease, and to find joy each day. Thank you truly for being here.